Now we come to this question, what is productivity?
Output by input.
Good. Output by input is a very, what do you call, is the most acceptable definition, and we say output by input. Can it be input by output?
It depends.
It depends, yes. It depends. In many places around the world in construction, it can be either we tend to use output by input in our country mostly, and mostly for civil works, but input by output is also commonly used in the construction industry, especially for mechanical works. It is very commonly used, piping and all of that. So we have to be careful when we talk about productivity, which is the ratio we're looking at. Okay, so when we take, for example, output by input, that is what we will continue with. So you can see an activity going on there, that's concreting. What would be output here and what would be input? So we are looking at concrete poured. So you had mentioned certain kind of factors, they were correct, but can we be more precise? Concrete poured means what is a unit? Cubic meters of concrete poured. Okay, and when we look at so that would be the output would be cubic meters of concrete. What would be the input?
Man-hours.
Yes. Okay, so this would be meter cubed and man hours. Okay, that would be one potential measure, that's output by input. Now we take reinforcement. You can see reinforcement. If I was doing reinforcement, what would it be?
kg by man hour.
Yeah, it could be kg by man hour. Okay. Now, is there any other input or output I could think of for these two examples? This was concrete, this was reinforcement. Cost can also be there, right? So my output might still be the quantity, okay, depending on how I'm choosing to measure. The input could be, instead of man hour, I could use cost, okay, and what cost could I use?
Material cost as well as man hours.
Yeah, I could use my labor cost, or I could use my total cost, not just material, labor, material, all of the cost together, everything together, okay. So this is typically what we have. I'm just reiterating what we discussed. So we can have input either in terms of man hours, okay, or crew hours. We'll discuss when to use man hours, when to use crew hours, or in terms of cost, it could be labor cost or it could be total cost. So this is what is constituting the input. Now we have work that's done. So here we have an example of a masonry thing. This is output. We know now it's quantity of work that's done, and we have quantity of work, okay, divided by either man hours or total cost or cost of man hours. All of these are variations in how productivity is measured on projects. Once you standardize a measure you want to use for your project, understand the benefits, the limitations, and these numbers can vary depending on assumptions made. Many factors are there. Productivities we definitely use it as a reference, but by no means is it like a universal value. There are many factors which influence these. Okay, now when we go into input, again, we talked about all of these variations. We had crew days, crew hours, man hours. You have to decide. We have all of these options are there, and or we have labor cost and total cost. Okay, now you have to decide which element is which. How do you actually want to go about deciding the input? And it makes a difference. Okay, if for example you can see here, if I'm going to use man days, which means I'm taking a crew and I'm taking the individuals in the crew, it would mean that almost each individual is contributing equally. If I'm taking crew day, then I've aggregated the whole crew into all the people into one crew, and I'm considering at a crew level. That means there could be variation there could be helper, there could be skilled person, there could be difference in the way it works. So if I use man day calculation for a very heterogeneous crew, you will have problems with the way it's being measured. Okay, whereas if I have a homogeneous crew and then I use man day, it's more reasonable, because everyone's output is in proportion. Or I can use cost, okay, where might be my helper gets less and my skilled person gets more, and in which case might be my cost basis is okay. So when we go into the whole issue of how do I choose my input, one has to understand the inputs I'm choosing to measure my productivity in my site and the limitations and any assumptions that are made in it. Okay, so the choice between which system is used on your site. So a lot of times we might not have a choice of which system we can use. We might be having a system in place, but do understand what it actually measures. Are there any doubts or questions at this stage?
No, sir.
Okay, so then why would, okay, between choosing cost between the labor cost or total cost, or let me say, how would we decide between choosing labor cost or total cost? Which would I use to measure productivity? If I had an option between the two, what would be my decision point?
So it depends on like if whether it is only a single activity or there are different chain of activities.
Right. So assuming even if it's a single activity, okay, I would look at it this way: to do total cost, my measurements have to be more precise. I need more effort to
Yes.
estimate total cost. Whereas labor cost is a simpler calculation. Now, if I'm using productivity to control my project or control my progress and what we need, we're using it for monitoring and control, I would go with labor cost because I can use the numbers readily available for me as an input to understand my productivity calculation. If I'm trying to do an overall accounting process and I really need to get into the nitty-gritty details, then the effort to calculating total cost is required, and ultimately many projects will use total cost for their accounting purpose. But I might use labor cost because I need weekly measurement of productivity, and I might just use it for as an interim measure. Then why use labor cost? I might just use labor hours, crew hours or man hours, which is even more of a broader measure. I don't need to worry about cost. So I could control my weekly or monthly or bi-weekly progress with just this measure of using crew days, crew hours or man days. If I want more precise information on the project as I go forward and not necessarily monitoring and controlling, I would go with the cost system. Okay. Yeah, we go to outputs now. We will cover this in more detail in the next section when we go. Okay, we have different methods in which outputs can be calculated, and this again becomes important. Okay, so if I use units complete for an activity which has many subtasks, I will not get a correct output measure, and my productivity value will seem incorrect and will not correlate with what is actually happening on site. So here again we have to understand what the issues are and select the method appropriately based on type of activity. But like I said, we will cover this in more detail in the next lecture. Now we come to this next question. So once we discussed right in the beginning that we will discuss what is productivity and what is production. So now we come to this term production. What is production?
The total output unit, like what you are producing out of the, like what you can bill or
what you can build, that's correct. So again we come to this example here. You have concrete being poured. There we talked about productivity. In this context, what would we say is production?
It would be work completed.
Work completed.
or
Anything
how
else?
How many cubic meter of which grade of concrete is there?
Right. How many cubic meters? So you're saying this is something like cubic meters of concrete. Okay. Or meter cubed. Okay. Divided by.
Over a period of time.
So I will need per day, say.
Yes.
Production is not, or a month or a week. Okay. So it's not just meter cubed. When you say how much I can bill, that might be by the end of the month.
Yes.
Okay. So there is a time element, but how is this time element different from what we saw earlier? Earlier was man day or crew day or man hours. What is the difference?
So man day, crew day, they're actually what the people are actually working.
Right.
Only the working time. Here day is normally calendar.
Right. So this is a day without measuring effort. This is only measuring time as a flowing entity. It's not measuring the effort that went in. So this is not really input. So we are measuring only output over almost like time. And it's not a time effort based time. Okay. So basically you can see production is a quantum of work done in a specified time. So it's just output by time. So it could be cubic meters of concrete poured in 1 hour, it could be concrete poured over a day, it could be a month, but it is the main unit there is the cubic meters and the time unit comes.
Then sir, this production is more or less related to the overall activity, not only to the sub activities.
I could take concreting.
Like in concreting only. So I can take, okay, this particular 1000 cubic meter has been poured in day.
Yes.
In 1 day. That means the overall concreting. But
Right.
the sub activities of the concreting part, those will not come under production. Those is the sub part only. We cannot calculate that.
Right, but my productivity also requires, so to pour this quantity, I need that all the
That's
sub
true.
activities also as far as productivity goes.
That's true.
Okay, so that way they are in a similar kind of process.
Okay.
Okay. So when we look at productivity and production, you can see that productivity looks at efficiency. Okay, and production looks at throughput. Now, which is more important?
Both.
Both are important. Okay, so we cannot say, oh, productivity, is this course has deals with productivity in a way, so productivity is more important than production, or actually on our sites, which one do we measure more frequently? Production. We measure production more frequently. So we can't say no, production is important, productivity is not important. Both are important. Okay, so in this part, so just again, I think this is a fairly simple example to show you, illustrate what each means. So just take a look at this. Okay, you have a site that has produced 200 square meters of brickwork with 2 masonry crew. Okay, so what is the production?
Production is 200.
200. Okay, so production will be 200. Okay, and what is the productivity?
21.
Depends.
It depends on how you choose to measure. If you choose to measure by crew, then it's 100 square meters per crew day. If you choose to measure by man day,
Then it will be divided by 8.
yeah, you'll have to divide it by 8 and then you get 25 square meters per man. Okay, the production remains the same because that's production. So you can see how the units play a big role in this whole process. Now, instead of using crew or man day or crew day or man day, I could use the cost that I incurred for the labor. Okay, so that would give me so many square meters per rupee. Okay, and that could be the labor cost or it could be total cost. Okay, and now again, so let's just take this. Why would I prefer labor cost rather than total cost? One, we discussed it's simpler to calculate labor cost or simpler to do labor because the other one requires a few more steps of calculation. What would be another thought in why I would prefer to do it based on labor alone? And this is for monitoring purpose, okay, not for final calculation or final profitability on that. Why would I prefer labor? Any thoughts? So if I look at variability, okay, if a labor is idle, assuming that we are paying him a daily wage, we are not actually getting work for that period of time the person is idle, but we are still payment is made. Okay, my material as inventory cost is still important. Okay, but if I track labor, I will be able to get a good idea if there's a lot of inefficiency in my labor usage. There will be, I can start taking steps towards improving identifying where the problems in my site or problems in that activity. So labor is kind of like your litmus test. It tells you initially where is the issue. I can start off with that. If I start measuring more complex kind of parameters, it will be more difficult to start.
Plus, sir, it will be time taking. So
it will be time taking, exactly. More effort, more calculation. But if I can get the same result with a simpler step and simpler calculation, let's get started with that. That's why globally labor is used as the input. Labor hours is used as the input because in general it gives you a much better, easier way to understand what is happening on your project. This doesn't mean, we'll discuss this later. There are other ways also.